Infinity Pool is Brandon Cronenberg's follow-up to Possessor, a heavy sci-fi sort of horror drama which explores the very idea of identity and what it means to truly be you. And much the same can be said about Infinity Pool, a fascinating yet flawed film that delves into the dark side of humanity and how easily that side can come out. And so what follows comes an unrelenting series of events that showcases the callousness and savagery that the people around us are potentially capable of, following a complicated series of events that leaves our protagonist James in a confusing whirlwind of an identity crisis. Basically what happens is while abroad he accidentally kills somebody and is sentenced to death. But to get out of facing the consequences on a technicality, the idea is pitched to him to instead willingly scientifically duplicate himself and then immediately sacrifice this double. The solution being that technically they did execute the man and his DNA, yet still find a way to work around this and allow the original James to live. An insanely fortunate one-in-a-lifetime chance that has come across, or so we think, because when those around James also go through this process and then again and then again and again and again, it soon becomes clear what is really going on. Just by the way, from here on out, there's going to be some spoilers, but I'm not going to get deep down into all of the details of the story. Just in case you haven't seen it, spoilers will follow. And with that, I think the best thing that can be said about Infinity Pool is that it undoubtedly wields an interesting concept in cloning oneself and then killing said clone, presumably with a payout to basically excuse any and all behavior and get away with any crime and debauchery desired. The deal becoming that the wrongdoers pay their way through the process over and over again, allowing access to a life free of restriction being what they get out of it, and what the agreeing government or whoever the hell the authority they're bribing gets out of it is, well, a payday. It's win-win for all those involved, except for the poor souls getting hurt and executed in the process, as well as a round table of innocent clones being created or born and ceremoniously killed, letting the originals constantly continue in an infinite loop of fucking around and letting another version of themselves take the blame. And that morality of creating a depiction of oneself and destroying it begins to blur when we start to consider just how human these clones actually likely are. And of course though, the twist being that we don't truly know if it is in fact the clone or the original getting killed each time. For example, every time Mia Goth's character, who acts as the leader of this criminally wretched group, clones herself and then goes on to kill herself, we don't truly know if they've actually been swapped out or not. And with the person coming out being an exact replica and remembering cloning themselves as well, it technically doesn't even really matter, meaning that it's a risk every clone cycle that the current version is only unknowingly replacing themselves. Because like I said, it really makes no difference to anyone around the one doing the cloning as to which version comes out on top. Clone or not, to anyone else it's the same person, even to the clone themselves who aren't sure, as these clones would be complete via being an exact imitation with a full set of the original's memories and with the same inherent general behavior and instinct too, as well as having original thoughts. The terrifying aspect to this being that if you were ever going to take part in such an exploit, how easily you truly lose a sense of who you really are. And what's explored in the film becomes a game of self-preservation, always fucking over anybody else other than your true self, even if that other person you're fucking over is literally self. Think of it this way, if you go to bed tonight and fall asleep and somehow they, while you're asleep, make a clone of you, they create a perfect clone, they move you somewhere else while you're still asleep and replace you with that clone in your bed. Well, imagine being that clone, waking up in the place that they remember going to sleep and being the person that they remember being. It's kind of all about perspective. Who's to say that they aren't really that person, And I think inherently in these sorts of sci-fi scenarios, we would innately choose ourselves over our other selves. That's kind of the whole point. You would always think of yourself as the true you. It also must be stated though that I find it interesting that even in a world where such a science fiction exploit does exist, it's still of course only the wealthy who ever have the opportunity to use it. And in that way, it's not even that different from the real world anyway. Buying your way to freedom isn't exactly a new concept. Being rich allows you to take advantages that the not-haves haven't even thought of yet. And with that, Infinity Pool is a film that intrigued the hell out of me. But even still, I think it sort of falls flat in some ways. It's just kind of too bad that the film also has an over-reliance on coloured lens flare-filled dissolved compilations of vague sex acts taking place numerous times, and one very unnecessarily gratuitous depiction of a handjob taking place, which can ultimately be ignored as not that big a part of the film, and that's fine, but the sense of Cronenberg being a provocateur constantly shows itself throughout. Scenes involving violent stabbings and throat slittings, executions, and titty sucking are all held into place here, while I think it's just because Brandon Cronenberg wants to disturb, and I actually think such elements actually takes away from the initial premise, because rather than the film exploring its ideas with class, it instead kind of becomes a juvenile depiction of all the worst things that he could think of. I just think he wanted to piss people off, and that's really the extent of it. And I think that he pushed it so much so that it begins to feel like the characters feel a bit unrealistic to me, and that's what broke the trance for me. Since the film goes on to focus in on this such an unlikable group of absolute cunts, I've found myself annoyed by the missed opportunity to show a relatable person slowly delving into this life of rigorous cloning and the escalation in crimes to follow. But instead, the main character they're well left with here is just kind of an asshole right from the start, and it doesn't take much convincing for him to start gleefully partaking in violent acts. And I think that that kind of takes away from the film. It doesn't feel super relatable. And look, I guess the point isn't that we're supposed to like or agree with their actions, but even so, I still had difficulty empathizing with any of these main characters. And I honestly think it's as simple as the fact that I don't share the affinity of abusing people, pissing on them, killing them, or belittling them, like the main group of characters so clearly do. Seemingly with no respect for literally anybody around them and acting like infuriating hooligans, doing what they do just because they can with seemingly no other motivation beyond that. But the difference between them and me is that even if I could get away with such shitty behavior, I wouldn't want to. It doesn't appeal to me, you know? And so with that lack of hesitancy on their or even the protagonist's hands, Infinity Pool becomes a bit of an endurance test, watching these people commit horrendous acts for not really much of a reason. But pushing that boundary isn't exactly surprising coming from this director, and I do think that it emphasizes its terrifying concept for the potential of what something like cloning technology could bring to this world, given people like this may end up using it in such creative ways. And with that sense of freedom this provides, what animalistic behavior may come out of it. And as the ending of the film suggests, is a cycle that will only continue annually indefinitely, but only when the perpetrators are bored enough to want to come back and do it all over again. Their disregard for the others around them glowing red as just part of their planned out vacation activities. How fucking evil is that? Anyway, so yeah, though, I do think this is an overall a pretty good film. Even if I didn't love it as much as I was expecting to, I didn't enjoy every second while I was watching it. But in retrospect, I can say I think it was pretty brilliant. I'm still glad films like these are coming out as well. And with that, can we please shut the fuck up about how Hollywood only ever produces sequels and remakes and reboots, please, because movies like these still come out pretty often, to be honest. So please, grow up, jump out in your Super Mario Brothers session and check this thing out instead. I can't wait to see what Cronenberg does next, but it's here where I do have to say that in my mind, Possessor is the superior film still so far. Anyway, I guess that's about all that I have to say, so thank you for watching at this point, and before you go and do that thing, just like, comment, share, subscribe, all that shit. And I'm out of here. Goodbye.